Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran down to the marketplace and cried out, "Where is God?" And the crowd laughed at the madman and said, "What do you mean, where is God? Did you lose him? Has God gone on vacation? Is he in the toilet?" And the madman jumped into their midst and he pierced them with his eyes. "Where is God?" he cried. "I will tell you. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Is there still any up or down? Are we not plunging continually backwards, sideways, forwards, in all directions? Are we not straying as though through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Can you not hear the grave diggers burying God? Can you not smell the divine decomposition? God's decomposed too, you know. God is dead, he remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? That which was holiest in all creation has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood from us? What water is there for us to cleanse ourselves with? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of the deed too great for us? Must we not ourselves become gods merely to seem worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed than killing God. And whoever is born after us will belong to a higher history than all that has come before. And at this, the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners. And they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw his lantern on the ground and it went out. "Perhaps I have come too early," the madman said. "My time is not yet." These words were written by Friedrich Nietzsche. And I spend every hour of every working day asking if Nietzsche was right. Is God really dead? Or rather, not dead, but never born. An illusion from the start. The death of God is the question I've dedicated my life to. And in fact, there's this whole field of study in university partly devoted to this question. It's called philosophy of religion. And tonight, I will be introducing you to 3 separate areas in the philosophy of religion. Now, philosophy of religion is distinct from religious studies. Philosophy of religion doesn't just study what religions believe. No, it dares to ask the question, does it make any sense? Is religion rational? By putting the words philosophy of before religion, it changes the question from what do religions believe to whether those beliefs make any sense philosophically. Are there any good reasons to believe in God in the first place? Is God dead or alive? But how could anyone even know that? You can't exactly look around for God's corpse or find one of his footprints in the grass. How does one investigate God? How do we go about thinking about religion philosophically? How do you answer a question that big? And there's a simple way to start. So simple, in fact, that children do it all the time. Daddy, where do babies come from? Well, from me and your mother, we made this special hug, and then we got you. But where did you and Mommy come from? Well, from our mother's tummies, of course. But where did her mummy come from? Well, from her mummy. And where did her mummy come from? Well, from her mother. And where did her mother come from? I'm afraid it's mothers all the way down, dear. My parents come from their parents, come from their parents, come from their parents. That's all you're going to get. But what about before that, Daddy? Before that? You mean like, where do humans come from? Yeah, that. Where do humans come from, Dad? Well, humans evolved from other animals. But where did the animals come from? From more animals. But where did the animals come from, Daddy? From the earth. Where did the earth come from? From the universe. Where did the universe come from? The Big Bang. But where did the Big Bang come from? Ask your mother. And if you just keep going further and further back, like curious children, you get to the universe itself. What caused the universe? Why do we exist at all? Why is there something rather than nothing? And of course, the old answer used to be, God did it. Who made the universe? God did it. Who made the stars? God did it. Who made the sun? God did it. Mary, who got you pregnant? God did it. And for a long time, that was a satisfying answer. Who made everything? God did it. But as any idiot will soon respond, okay, God did it, but who did God? What caused God? Where did God come from? And that stumped people for a while, until someone pointed out that nothing caused God, because God is outside of time. Cause and effect only make sense within time. So you kick the ball, and 1 second later that causes the ball to smack the goalkeeper in the face. But none of that makes any sense if something is outside of time. If there is no 1 second later, no before and after, no cause and effect. God can't be within time and space because he's supposed to be the creator of time and space. He's supposed to be above time, looking down on it like a chessboard. You see, it's not that everything needs a cause of its existence. No, it's that everything that begins to exist needs a cause of its existence. But if something is outside of time, it never begins to exist. There was never a moment where it didn't exist in order to then be brought into existence. It just always is. Everything within time and space needs a cause, but God is not within time and space. God is eternal. And some people would be stumped by that for a bit. Whenever you start talking about time, everyone's like, whoa. But if you're smart, you'll eventually respond, but if something can be eternal, then why can't we just say our universe is eternal? If God didn't begin to exist but has just always existed, why can't we say the same thing about the universe? Why appeal to an eternal God when the universe itself could just be eternal? Cut out the middleman. What caused the universe? Nothing. It just is. The universe is eternal. And that was a pretty good response until recently. Until the discovery of the Big Bang. What the Big Bang showed was that our universe is not eternal but began to exist. That space and time banged into being 14 billion years ago. So what, or who, made the Big Bang go bang? With the confirmation of the Big Bang, the last 50 years has seen a resurgence of the cosmos question in what is called the cosmological argument for the existence of God. The cosmological argument is the argument from the existence of the cosmos, from the fact that anything exists at all. Repeat after me, the cosmological argument. Now turn to the person next to you and say it 3 times fast. Excellent, the brainwashing is complete. So the Big Bang shows that the cosmos had a cause, and the cosmological argument says that cause is God. But what if it isn't? What if before our universe banged into being, there wasn't God, but just another universe? And before that universe banged into being, there was another universe, and it just bangs all the way down. An infinite regression of past universes, one ending for the next to begin with another great shebang, on and on into infinity. What if there is just an infinite series of past universes with no rock bottom? And here's the response that I've heard to that. Let me ask you, if I said I'd give you a cheeseburger after an infinite period of time had elapsed, would you ever get the cheeseburger? No, because an infinite period of time would have to occur first. Infinity doesn't just mean really long, no, it means not finite, not travelable over a finite period of time. So no matter how long you waited, you'd never reach infinity. We'd never reach this moment in time. Because an infinite period of time would have had to have occurred first. We'd never reach this moment in time, and infinitely worse, you'd never get your cheeseburger. Our universe began to exist, and so it needs a cause of its existence. And you can't just keep going further and further back into an infinite past time. No, at some point you have to hit something outside of time. At some point you have to hit the eternal. But what if this eternal thing isn't God? Why can't the eternal be something impersonal, something natural? Sure, there has to be some eternal cause of everything, but why does that have to be a personal God? Well, remember that eternity is not just a really long period of time. No, eternity is outside of time. And if something is outside of time, then it's outside of all change, outside of all beginnings and endings, all cause and effect. And so eternity is not like going in one direction for a really long time. No, eternity is frozen in place. The nature of eternity is like a frozen statue. There's no time, no change, no cause or effect, no beginning or end. That's what happens when you go outside of time. But then, how can something stuck outside of time begin to create the universe in time? If it's outside of time, then how can it begin to create the universe? Because to begin to create assumes that time already exists. So yes, because it's outside of time, the eternal does not need a cause of its existence. But also because it's outside of time, it cannot begin to cause anything else either. And if the eternal is an impersonal, natural, non-living, non-conscious thing, then that would be it. It would be stuck in its inherent nature of timeless eternity and could never begin to create the universe. But, and this is where it gets interesting, if the eternal is a personal being like God, then perhaps it can act outside of its eternal nature and choose to create in time. Why is that? What do I mean by that? Well, let's take this pen. If I throw this at someone in the audience, better get off your phone. If I throw a pen at the audience, nothing personal. If I throw that pen at someone, and it sort of arcs and then it falls to the ground, did it choose to fall to the ground? No, because a pen is not a personal being. It doesn't have free will or choice. It didn't choose to fall, but fell the way it did because of the nature of gravity combined with the nature of its own weight pushing against the nature of the air. The pen is impersonal. It does not choose what it does, but is limited to its inherent nature. Limited to what it is. Unable to choose anything different. Its path is fixed. But in contrast, personal beings like humans allegedly have free will. Sure, nature and nurture are major factors, but at the end of the day, most of us still think we play some part in our destiny. We're not limited completely by the nature of our biology or the nature of our circumstances. No, we have the ability to rise above our nature and make a real choice for ourselves. We have free will. The pen cannot just choose to get up and walk around, but I can. We are personal beings, and so our path is not fixed. Now, applying this to the cosmos, if the eternal is something impersonal, something natural, then it would be stuck in its inherent nature. Its nature would be outside of time, and so it could never choose to do anything in time. Like the pen, it would be stuck in its eternal path, never moving, ever frozen. But if the eternal is a personal being with free will, then perhaps it is not limited by its nature, but can choose to do something different. If it is personal, then even if its eternal nature makes it timeless, perhaps it can choose to act outside of its nature to create in time. A personal God would not be limited by its eternal nature outside of time, and so could freely choose to create the universe in time. A choice explains the cosmos, and a choice implies a chooser. Of course, whether you find this convincing depends on whether you believe in free will or not. Many philosophers think free will is nonsensical, that it makes no sense for something to act outside of its nature. And if you don't think free will makes any sense for humans, then you're obviously not going to think it makes any sense for God and the cosmos. But if you do believe in free will, if you have this powerful phenomenological sense that you really are free, then to be consistent with your own beliefs, you should probably admit that the cosmological argument has some serious weight to it. So that's our first area in the philosophy of religion, the cosmological argument. Now I'm going to take off my jacket because it's really hot, and I also wore it so that I could take it off for dramatic effect in the middle, when I was going to really tell you the truth, but it's too hot. I'm not going to make it. So, for my next trick, I'm going to need a volunteer. Preferably someone who won't upstage me in any way. Also someone who's comfortable with being on camera. Anyone? Hey! Welcome. Everyone. What's your name, sir? Paul. Great. Nice to meet you, Paul. Everyone give Paul a round of applause. Thank you. Would you? So, who thinks I should slap Paul? Don't worry, I'm not going to slap Paul. I'm not allowed to. Right? I'm not allowed? Yeah. But why shouldn't I slap him? I mean, look at him. Well, I shouldn't slap him because, I could get sued or go to jail and never probably ever be asked to do a talk at Cambridge again. But deeper than backlash from society, most of us have a sense that I shouldn't slap him because it would be wrong. That morally I ought not to slap Paul, at least not without a good reason. But see, when Nietzsche declared the death of God, he believed this was the death of morality itself. Nietzsche believed that since God is dead, we no longer ought to do anything at all, that right and wrong are just a bedtime story that society invented to keep everyone in line. You see, in the old religious version of things, morality was eternal, grounded in the nature of an eternal God. God doesn't invent what is right and wrong. Rather, God is, in God's very self, the standard of right and wrong. So in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the disciple John wrote that God is love. Not that God is loving, but that God is love, the very thing itself. Basic moral values always were, always are, and always will be the same. They never change, but are eternally grounded in an eternal being. Love is always better than hate. Compassion is eternally and forever always better than cruelty. These values have existed in eternity. They weren't something that was invented or created in time, but are grounded in the eternal nature of God. But if God is dead, the story of morality reads very differently. If God is dead, then in the beginning, there was nothing. There's no thing called right or wrong, love or hate, good or evil. Those things didn't exist. And then the universe banged into being, and over billions of years you get animals and humans, and slowly, through evolution and social constructs, humanity invents the idea of right and wrong. Morality is not grounded in the eternal nature of God forever and for always, but is something that began to exist in time. Morality was invented. And if morality is just an invented thing, then why can't someone else invent their own morality and it have just as much claim as any other? It's like kids inventing the rules of a game. One kid might say, well, you have to run around the tree 3 times and then come back and do a push-up and then kick the can. And another kid's like, no, that's the stupidest thing ever. You have to run around the tree 5 times and then you kick the can and then you do the push-ups and then you kick the can again. And neither one is more objectively right than the other because the kids are just making it up as they go along. One person might say we should love each other. And another person might say love is weakness and life is about survival. And neither one is more objectively right or wrong than the other because they're both just making stuff up. There's no higher set of rules by which one can be declared right and the other wrong. There's no objective, eternal thing called morality. Now, to clarify, this doesn't mean you need to believe in God to be a good person. That's not what Nietzsche's saying. There are priests who molest children, and there are atheists who, don't. There are plenty of good atheists and plenty of bad theists. You don't need to believe in God to be good. Rather, what Nietzsche is saying is that if God doesn't exist, then the term good has no objective meaning. See, it's not about whether you believe in God, It's about whether he actually exists or not. In the same way, you don't have to believe in gravity to trip and fall down. You don't have to believe in God to be good, but if God isn't actually real, then is there such a thing as good? If God isn't real, then right and wrong aren't objectively real either. They're just a bedtime story society tells itself to keep everyone in line. Now, lucky for my friend Paul here, there's a response to that. A common response has been, but society didn't just invent morality. No. Evolution has ingrained in us certain biological instincts of right and wrong. Morality isn't a social construct, it's ingrained in our very DNA. And it's an interesting point, Paul. But it doesn't make morality any more objective. What it does do is make morality relative to our evolutionary circumstances. So, for example, there's a species of wasp which evolved in such a way that it lays its eggs inside the body of its prey. And then the eggs hatch and slowly eat their prey alive from the inside out. And if we had evolved that way, then laying my eggs inside of Paul and eating them from the inside out would be totally okay. By grounding morality in evolution, you don't save morality, but just show how utterly subjective it is, and how we just as easily could have evolved to think of selfishness as a good thing for our survival. What's more, evolution has allowed psychopaths to exist and survive. So why does a psychopath's morality have any less claim than a normal person's? There might be less of them and more of us, but if morality is just about who has more numbers, then morality is about might, not right. And I hate to use Hitler here, because he's so overused, but I'm going to do it anyway. The whole point of Nazism was to take control of evolution to produce a master race. Had they succeeded and killed off everyone who disagreed with them, then Nazism would not be immoral because society would have evolved to be okay with it. If morality is merely the byproduct of our evolution, then whatever humanity does becomes, by definition, the new morality, because there's nothing higher than us by which we can be declared right or wrong. So in the 1600s, when much of Western society was fine with slavery, then that was by definition moral, for there is no source of morality higher than humanity by which we could be judged. We could look back at them today and say that the rules of their game are wrong according to the rules of our game, but they could say the same thing about us, and there's no higher standard by which to judge one claim superior to the other. And you might say, but our society is so much more loving than they were. Yes, but any standards by which we could judge slave owners, such as love or equality, would themselves be an invention, and just as much a social construct as anything the slave owners could say to us in response. Once a higher reference point is lost, it's not just patriarchy or white supremacy or heteronormativity that become social constructs. No, equality, love, tolerance, compassion, all of it would be social constructs we've invented and can just as easily be deconstructed. Now, many great philosophers have admitted this, admitted that if God is dead, objective morality isn't real. And yet many of those same philosophers do not believe in God, Because simply wanting the world to have meaning does not make it so. We might wish we lived in a moral universe, but that doesn't mean we do. Indeed, you should have great respect for atheists who admit this and have the courage to face the void head on without turning back for comfort. Of course, if God is dead, then the courage to face the void would be no more objectively good than being a coward, but let's not talk about that. So, in the end, perhaps morality can't show if God is real or not. But what it does do is reveal the stakes of the question. If God is dead, it's not just a matter of whether there's a bearded man in the clouds who sees you when you're sleeping and knows when you're awake. No, the God question is the question, without which morality and love and goodness lose any objective meaning. That's why Nietzsche's madman didn't just shrug off the death of God, but cries out in horror, "How did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Are we not plunging continually? Backwards, sideways, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space?" You can see I've thoroughly depressed all of you now. So let's move on. Thank you, Paul.
Okay.
You can go back down. I greatly enjoyed leaving him up here for the whole thing. No, thank you. Excellent work sitting there and doing nothing. Appreciate it. Let's kick off our third and final discussion in philosophy of religion with a riddle. Some of you are like, "Oh, the final one, finally, it's almost over." Let's kick it off, the final discussion, with a riddle. Once upon a time, a man named Baron Munchausen got stuck in a swamp. Silly Munchausen. He soon fell in, and losing his grin, was stuck with no way out. Sinking down, he looked around and reasoned to himself, anything I would grab hold of to pull myself out of this swamp would either be supported by something else, by itself, or by nothing. Now, if I grab onto a vine or something that is supported by something else, then that something else would itself have to be supported by something else. And whatever supported that would itself need to rest on something else, and so on and on into infinity, and I'll never actually hit rock bottom and find something solid by which to pull myself out of this swamp. "Ah," Munchausen said to himself, "but if I take option 2, if I grab onto something that's supported by itself, that can't help me either, for it is circular, like trying to pull myself out of the swamp by my own hair. But if I grab onto something else that is supported by nothing, if I grab onto something that's supported by nothing at all, that can't help me either, because it's supported by nothing. So I might as well settle down to die, for there is no way out of this swamp." Now, as a survival manual, the story of Baron Munchausen is not very helpful. But as a parable about the nature of faith and evidence, it is telling indeed. For you see, any belief must be justified based on something else, based on itself, or based on nothing. Now, if a belief is justified based on the evidence of something else, then that something else must also be justified based on something else. And so it just keeps going further and further back without ever hitting rock bottom or finding a solid basis for one's belief. But if a belief is justified based on itself, then it's circular. Like saying the Bible is true because the Bible says so. Yet, if a belief is justified based on nothing at all, then there's no reason to believe it. You just believe it without any evidence. Why do I believe it? I do. I just do. So how do we get out of the intellectual swamp if every belief is either supported by something else, by itself, or by nothing? For every truth claim, you can always ask, well, how do you know that? And whatever they say, you can respond, well, how do you know that? And it can just keep going on and on until they admit they can't go any further. They have no more reasons. They simply believe it because they do. They have no justification for why they believe it. They just do. You see, every worldview has to start from a set of assumptions that cannot be proven, because if they could be proven, whatever you would use to prove it would itself be your starting assumption, and then the problem would just be pushed further back. And so there are a number of things that we cannot prove or even make probable, but we just sort of accept. So, for example, we cannot prove that the human mind is rational. Any argument we would make that we are rational already assumes we're rational enough to make the argument. And even if we weren't that rational, would we know it? If we weren't rational beings, would we know we weren't rational beings? I mean, does a crazy person know that they're crazy? We also can't prove the physical world is real. Any physical evidence you would use to try and prove the physical world exists already presupposes precisely what you are trying to prove. How do I know my hand is real? Well, because it hurts when I slap my face. But how do I know my face is real? Because I just do. My face just is. Okay. But what if it isn't? We don't always know when we're dreaming, do we? And what if reality is like that? We think we're in the real world, but it's all a dream, like in the Matrix. There is no spoon. David Hume showed that there is no argument to prove that cause and effect are real. That we never actually see causality itself. We just see one thing happen and then another thing happen as a result, but we never see the thing in between that's supposed to be called causality. We just accept cause and effect because we do. Furthermore, the sciences test what is repeatable, because they assume that what happens in the past will continue to happen in the future. But how do we know that what happens in the past will continue to happen in the future? Well, because that's what happened in the past. How do we know the sun will rise tomorrow? Well, because that's what it's done in the past. Okay, but how do we know that what things do in the past is what they'll continue to do in the future? Well, because that's usually what happened in the past. And so the scientific method itself is ultimately circular. And yet, somehow we still go on living and acting as if those beliefs really are true. Because at some point, you have to stop questioning and just accept things on faith. There are dozens of things we just believe because we do. We just have this sense that, yeah, that's real, and if you try to deny it, you're just an idiot, and I don't have an argument for why you're an idiot, you just clearly aren't living in reality. There are dozens of things we just believe because we do, and there's no deeper argument or evidence to support it. We just have this strong sense that that is the way things are. And if some assumptions can be believed without evidence, why can't God be one of those starting assumptions? Dr. Elvin Plantinga from the University of Notre Dame argued that even if we could prove the existence of God, whatever we use to prove it would itself need to be proved, and then whatever we use to prove the proof would itself need to be proved, and so on and so forth, and it would never end. And so, perhaps belief in God is not something that needs to be proven, but is one of the assumptions you start with in order to then prove other things. I mean, 95% of humans throughout history have believed in some sort of deities. It's one of those starting assumptions that we as a species seem almost hardwired to embrace. Could the existence of God perhaps be as rational as any other starting point? Because everyone, like Munchausen, has to start somewhere. And I think that's what a lot of tonight's discussion comes down to. People always want to talk about where the evidence leads, and there are some kinds of evidence that factor into this discussion. But at the end of the day, a lot of where you end up comes back to where you started. Phenomenologically, we are born into the world and we're immediately inundated with these experiences, with these seemingly contradictory presentations of what is real. Do we trust our emotions? Do we trust our five senses? Do we trust our moral intuitions? Do we trust our reason? Should we trust our basic experience of ourselves as having free will? Should we trust our basic experiences of the divine? Do we trust tradition? Do we trust our gut? Do we trust our sixth sense that something is up even if we don't know what it is? We are all thrown into this world and immediately presented with seemingly contradictory senses of things and have to choose which ones are more real than others. Have to choose what assumptions to follow and which assumptions to dismiss, which experiences we are going to start with and which experiences we are going to ignore. And it's these things we start with that usually guide the worldview we end up with. So I leave you not with a statement, but a question. What's your starting point? What is your basic phenomenological experience of the world? What are your starting presuppositions, your fundamental experiences, your beliefs that cannot be proved, but which you use to prove and disprove other things? Because if you have a powerful sense that you really do have free will, if you have an overwhelming sense that compassion and equality and love are objectively better than hate, if your experience of love is as objectively real as the atoms that compose your lover, if you have this innate sense that even when you're mad at God, there still really is a God to be mad at, if you have a sense that when you look up at the heavens, something is looking back at you, that we are not alone in the cosmos. If these are your basic phenomenological experiences of the world, then it's legitimate for you to follow those experiences through to their logical conclusion. But if your basic phenomenological experience of the universe is that there really is, like Dawkins says, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference, then that starting point is obviously going to direct where you end up. And that's completely legitimate. Because at the end of the day, we all have to start somewhere. Thank you.